So my name is Dr. Yoon Shin, and I'm the assistant professor of philosophical theology here at Southeastern University in the Barnett College of Ministry and Theology. I primarily teach our introduction to ethics courses and introduction to philosophy and some theology courses here and there. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this interview today, Professor Yoon. And so, Doctor, actually, now, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Dr. Yoon. And so, to start off this interview, we just asked all the professors, can you just go ahead and tell us how you came to start working at Southeastern University?
Yeah, so it was really God's providence, God's hand has been on my life for so many years, even during my BC days, before Christ days. So I started at Southeastern when I transferred back to Southeastern from my former seminary to continue my master's in theological studies program, and I kind of going back, I was just a year away from getting my Master of Arts in Theological Studies at my seminary, but because I was a commuter student and I was commuting a couple hours one way, I had to choose courses that would fit my commute. But then, year and a half in, I realized that I had a conflict of schedule, so I had to either take a semester off, which I didn't want to do, or take online courses, and the courses weren't courses that I wanted to take, which I didn't want to do. And then I found out that Southeastern was just starting their Master of Arts in Theological Studies program, so I transferred in. And when I transferred in, a couple months into it, there was a position open in the admission office for graduate admission, and so I applied and I got it. And so I did that for 3 years. And by the time I finished my Master of Arts in Theological Studies program, my friend and I were applying for PhD programs and whatnot. And my friend, who was the coordinator of graduate studies here in our college now, got accepted to a PhD program in Denver. So he had to vacate the director position, which then I was able to apply and get accepted for. And so that brought me into the Barnett College. And from there, there was a position open for an ethics and philosophy professor. So I applied for that, and here I am.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so how many years has that been now?
Let's see, that was October of 2011 when I first got hired at Southeastern. And so, and I've been teaching full-time. This is my 4th year teaching full-time.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so earlier you mentioned you had a BC era before Christ.
Yeah.
So can you go ahead and tell us your experience of how you came to know Christ and what your life was like before that?
Yeah, so I grew up in the church. My mom used to say that I went to church before I was born, along with my brother, because we were in my mother's belly when she went to church. And kind of typical Christian life. I think that kind of got thrown into a tumultuous time when we immigrated to America when I was young, and when we finally moved to kind of outside Tampa, where I grew up, we found a Korean church in Tampa. So I attended there from 3rd, 4th grade until about junior year. There were several things that played a part in my leaving the church. Nothing atheistic, no arguments or anything like that. It more had to do with the difficulties of being an immigrant, living in a culture where there is no Korean population outside of the church that I attended, which was an hour away from where I lived, and my parents having to work all the time. So I grew up to be an angry kid because I didn't have good relationship with my parents. There wasn't really support system or anything like that. And so after a while, having to go to church an hour away amongst people who look like me, but whose culture was becoming more and more distant from who I was, and having now to spend time with my parents when Monday through Saturday I didn't spend time with them, so there was that distance I grew with my parents. just really got me angry. And once again, I was an angry kid by then. And so around junior year, I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not going. And, I think by that time they were just tired of my belligerence and whatnot, disobedience. So yeah, I was just angry. I just stopped going to church. And then afterwards, after I graduated from high school, I joined the Navy. And got into the whole drinking party life, cursing and all that. Then about 2 years in, when I was 20 years old, there was a guy on my ship who was a Christian. Didn't really pay attention to him. He was in a different department. I didn't really know him. But I saw him have this like religious experience in the galley. And so I talked to him about it. And he told me that this was the Holy Spirit. He was a charismatic guy. And so he invited me to his church. It was an African American church and so I attended there for about a month. And that experience with him, talking with him, kind of really shook me up. And I started kind of getting back to God. I think I basically said, God, I think I believe in you and whatnot. But that lasted only about a month. Until the following year, I think that was around November of 2002. And then the following year, July 4th, Independence Day, I came back home. And my friend threw a Independence Day party and, had a great time. But that morning I woke up and I just had this powerful conviction come upon me. Never had that experience before, never had it since then, where the only thought came to my mind was, gotta go home and pray. Like looking around my surroundings, there was this voice in my head. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was a voice that was telling me, it sounded like my voice, but it was really the voice of the Lord telling me, is this what you want to live for? Like, is this what life is about? And I even had this visceral reaction. My hands were shaking, and the sentence kept coming into my head: go home and pray. Gotta go home and pray. So I did. I got in my car. I drove home. I got home. No one was home. And got down on my knees and gave myself to the Lord. Repented, and that was that. It was July 5th, 2003. Yeah.
And so after July 5th, 2003, after that experience, how did your life change from that point on? What do you say?
Yeah. So one, back then, so I had a sailor's mouth, right? And I was big into porn and whatnot, probably addicted to it. Those two things were things that God had miraculously, I would argue, healed me from. And let's see. And so we also deployed in September, and deployment sucks. 6 months out at sea, it's just terrible, so boring. But it was really good because I found 6 strong Christian brothers and sisters. Just actually one lady, who and they held a Bible study after hours, and we met twice for a Bible study and on Sunday for worship. And so we met 3 times a week, and we did this for 6 months, and the deployment acted as a way of just intense discipleship for me and to be encouraged in my life. Once again, like I think I had mentioned that God's hands had been on me, His favor had been on me over my life even before I was Christian. I mean, I joined the military just for my own selfish reasons, but I think that was God's intention. He knew what would be brought on by the surroundings that I would be in and whatnot. And so, I think God had brought me into the military so that I would have this sweet fellowship and encouragement, and that really provided a strong foundation for the rest of my walk with the Lord, and I'm just very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, since becoming a believer, now you have a new set of hardships and you have to deal with. So, was there anything as a believer that you had to struggle or wrestle with?
Yeah. So I guess several things. One is something that I'm struggling with. Maybe not struggle. Something that I'm just trying to figure out for myself. Has always been the issue of my own identity and my theological identity. So I'm as an immigrant, I'm a third culture kid. When I go to Korea, I'm not fully Korean. I'm American. But when I'm here, I'm not fully American either. I am Korean. I eat stinky food, and I love it. And so this understanding of who I am has always been important to me. And this has continued in my own theological identity. Who do I belong to? When I first got saved, Korean Presbyterianism is big in Korea, and basically all of my family members are Presbyterian. When I got saved, I didn't really know what the denominations were, and my brother, when I got saved, he directed me to a lot of Presbyterian or Reformed folks, and even to this day, I consider John Piper, even with some of the theological differences that I have with him now, still consider John Piper as a spiritual father who I've never met. And even my preaching style or things like that, there's some Piper-esque demeanor and whatnot, I guess, in me. But I'm also a Pentecostal. I work at a Pentecostal institution. I'm spirit baptized, speaking in tongues, believe in signs and wonders and whatnot. So something for me, when I first became a Christian, I was brought into the evangelical world, and just kind of my personality, once I hold on to a particular school of thought or whatnot, especially when I was younger, I thought that was the truth. And for me, that was Christianity. That was what it meant to be a Christian. Literal reading of the Bible, young earth creationism, things like that. So, but through my education, knowing the diversity of global Pentecostalism and things like that, I've learned to become much wider in my theological views of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to hold on to, what it means to be orthodox, what it means to have orthopathos, what it means to participate in orthopraxis, and things like that. And so, especially in our kind of divisive times, learning to be irenic, ecumenical, while holding on to my own commitments has been difficult, challenging, but also often rewarding. Another challenge is, I think, being part of what you could call it an anti-intellectualist tradition, which is often Pentecostalism. Not everyone, of course, but tends to be. That's our background, at least. Knowing how to relate with my tradition as one who has gone to, one person called it seminary, right? I'm still trying to figure out what that means, how to do that, how to relate with my fellow brothers and sisters. That's been kind of a struggle, and also how my beliefs relate to political beliefs and things like that. That's trying to navigate all that has been difficult. Yeah.
You touched on a lot of things that were definitely important concerning figuring out the orthodox views of Christianity, because I know for myself personally, coming to Southeastern University, and a lot of the students were open up to all these other views of Christianity that we didn't know existed, but at the end of the day, a lot of the core stuff still remains the core stuff. And so now, moving away from the hardships, as believers too, we also thankfully have those mountaintops. And so, are there any experiences or points in your life where you can pinpoint and say, that really strengthened my faith right there? Or you see that as a huge turning point in your faith?
Yeah, so I had mentioned previously about my time during the deployment that was formative for me. And I've had to learn, because of not having close relationship with my family growing up, which we've reconciled and whatnot after I became a Christian, but growing up, not having good relationship and therefore not having affirmation and whatnot, that really had played a part in having low self-esteem and things like that during my young adulthood. And after becoming Christian, learning to love myself, learning to find value in myself, and then learning to forgive myself. So I guess that had been a struggle, but I don't know when it happened, but maybe through just theological education, through walking with the Lord, I became at some point convinced that God's mercies, I was convinced existentially in my spirit, like in the deep core of my being, that God's mercies are new every morning, and that nothing can separate God's love from me. That was really important for my faith, because in my young adulthood, as I was trying to figure this out, it was hard to forgive, especially after I got saved and I would sin. I would say, oh my goodness, why am I doing this, whatnot. So there was a lot of condemnation, self-condemnation on my part, which is also tied, which is connected to lack of self-esteem, lack of self-love, and whatnot. And so I don't know when, but I really just became convinced. I think it's just the testimony of the Spirit in my heart and my spirit that indeed God's mercies are new every morning, and that has been freeing for me. Yeah.
And so, before we end our interview, we just have 2 final questions for you, Doctor.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the first one is, if there's one thing you could tell all believers, what would that be?
Oh, just one thing.
Just one thing you could leave them with.
Oh gosh, there's.
And I'll go ahead and say the second one too, if you want to answer this one first.
All right.
The second one is, if there's one thing you could tell all non-believers, what would that be?
Yeah.
So whichever one you want to attack first.
This is difficult. You can't just say one thing to a theologian. Maybe I'll target it this way. For those Christians who are struggling in their faith and they're seeking answers, my encouragement is that to press in and do the research, right? Do the research. Our faith is deep. Our faith, there's so much depth to our faith that it's not merely about reading the Bible. It's not, right? It's not about checking our brains at the door. There's so much in our tradition, 2,000 years of history, where faithful men and women have studied this, have been led, I would argue, by the Spirit to these deep theological, philosophical truths, and just of truths of God's revelation found in the world, that they should not struggle because they think they've faced some type of intellectual dilemma, struggle. Press in, I would argue, and through pressing in, through their journey of searching, I think they will come to a deeper faith. Regarding what I would say to non-Christians, I'm a postmodern, so as a Christian, although I don't believe in relative truth, I think that's a straw man of postmodernism. So this one is more of the scientific community, audience, I guess. I would argue that, a statement I would make is, allow room for religious voices, because this view that scientific rationality is the only way or the ultimate way toward truth is one historically constructed view of rationality. Without, not saying that now everyone has different laws of logic or whatnot. There is objective reality. But the method of understanding knowledge is there are different ways to arrive at that. So I would argue the scientific epistemology of certain types of atheism is a historically constructed epistemology, one that is, I would argue, racist and sexist. Right? Prime example being Immanuel Kant. Right? So do we want to carry on that legacy, this racist epistemology? Right? In I think rightly so, we should be concerned with social justice. We should be concerned with oppression of various minority groups and whatnot. If, as non-Christians, they want to care for equality, I would argue they need to change their epistemology that allows for the voices of non-enlightenment epistemologies to have a voice in the public square. In that way, if so, then it allows voices of religions to speak, not just Christianity alone. I think we should want liberty, religious liberty for everybody, but it also, I think, is a step toward fighting against various forms of injustice.
Well, thank you, Professor Yoon. This concludes our interview, and so we just thank you for your time. And so
thank you. Yeah.
Make sure you keep
my
your
pleasure.
meeting on time.